Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. In this series, the Wild-Eye team take an image that they've captured out in the field, share a little bit more about the moments leading up to that image, and then also take you through the process of editing it in Lightroom. As we head closer to our Great Migration season, it seemed only fitting that we looked at an image of a dramatic Wildebeest crossing taken not too far from the Wild-Eye Mara camp a couple of years ago. I hope you'll enjoy this episode with me. Let's do it. All right, so everyone knows, as far as wildlife photography goes, there's nothing more dramatic than photographing the Great Migration, and having hundreds of thousands of wildebeest crossing the Mara River each year provides incredible photographic opportunities. It can sometimes be quite debilitating though for photographers, and you get caught up in the moment. So today I'm going to share what I would classify as pretty much an iconic, what I would believe an iconic image to come out of the Mara and the Great Migration. So here is the raw file. You can see here captured at 800 millimeters, f9, just giving myself a little bit of extra depth of field, and 1/800th of a second at ISO 640. 800th of a second, yeah, pretty much on the line there. Probably could have given it a little bit more, maybe 1250, 1600th of a second to make sure that things were really nice and detailed and frozen to capture all of that movement and motion. But got away with it on this occasion, and for me, the more than the technical side of things is the composition. So as you guys, if you've watched any of these previous episodes, you know I like to use something called eye mapping, where as soon as you see an image, you kind of decide where your eye gets drawn to immediately, and then you see how you explore the rest of the frame. So in this particular instance, it's bang straight onto this guy because it's dark against a dusty light background. So there's point of contrast. It's large as well, and then probably drift to this point over here to this wildebeest, and then over to the water on this side before then exploring the backdrop of these other wildebeest, kind of mimicking this movement and really adding a really nice sense of depth to the frame. So if we then take that as our starting point, and I've hit R to recompose as a shortcut, and we look at that, this is where our PowerPoint is at the moment. But if you recall, I said I'm drawn to this wildebeest, but then move across to this guy and then to here. Now this, to me, is a potentially distracting element. There's no point in trying to do brushes and clone aware, that sort of stuff. I'm just going to try and crop it out. So that might work. You then start and look around. Now hang on, we've got a point of contrast on the edge of the frame, half of a wildebeest's horn coming through in the background there. So I'm going to come in a little bit more and look at that. Now we have a wildebeest horn over there, but there's no contrast. We've got body leading through here, but it doesn't pull our eye away. And you see now the distraction on this left-hand side has been removed altogether. If I open up the crop tool as well, you'll see that this wildebeest is fully in the frame. So we've kind of got a bit of energy moving down from the top right down towards this bottom left. And our subject is now slap bang in the middle, but that's great because we've got depth to explore in the background. We've got leading lines coming through this way, and then this wildebeest still has a little bit of negative space on the left hand side of the frame to move into. Okay, so overall now let's have a look at our basics. Let's run through, maybe just lift the exposure on this frame just a touch. So I think somewhere around about there, and you see what we're getting is this lovely wash of the brighter dust in the background. Looking at the histogram, we've still got room to tease out some of the whites, and look at how that dust now comes alive. Now in doing this, we have not only increased the contrast between our subject and the background, but you'll see there's a little bit of color that's coming through there, which I'm not too sure how I feel about. Obviously, we could warm it up. That looks a little bit unnatural. If I bring this back just a touch, and somewhere around about there, that starts to look a little bit more like what I recall. And I think that's a good spot. So we've just cooled the color temperature down slightly, maybe a little too much in this instance. Let's go there. All right, so that's 5,400 down from 5,950, probably working off a custom white balance here that already tells you that it was overcast and cloudy conditions. So let's have a look there. Yeah, around about 5,400. Okay, excellent. On a global scale, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop down to my detail panel, and I'm going to use the masking tool, please guys, if you don't already do this on your images, every image needs to be sharpened and masked. And what I'm doing here, I'm holding down the Alt key and sliding out my masking slider to decide which edges, which are the most prominent edges, chosen by my depth of field and my focal point, are going to be sharpened by Lightroom. And that's great because now we've got our Wildebeest masked out over there, so we're now only sharpening those edges. Coming back to our basic panel, I do want to lift clarity on this image as a whole, and you'll see that it starts to bring a little bit of that detail back into the dust. So we're going to lift there. Now, an interesting one is going to be saturation, and I'm going to come back to this a little later and just show you a different take on this same image using that saturation slider. It would seem like most people these days tend to oversaturate the image and slide that over to the right, or if you're working in black and white, completely desaturate it. But there is a kind of medium in between where we're still left with some color and not necessarily purely a black and white, which I want to show you, and I think this image would work quite nicely for that. So let's carry on with some of these adjustments. In the tone curve adjustment, now remember, the tone curve refers to contrast in a tonal range. Unlike that big aggressive contrast slider in our basic panel, this allows us to make some more refined adjustments in particular tonal ranges. So in order to get that dust to really come alive and pop, I'm going to lift the contrast in the lights, and I'm going to drop the darks just slightly so that that Wildebeest of ours becomes a little bit more dramatic, and the contrast between our subject and the background is a little bit further enhanced. Right. Looking at this now, we've done some basic adjustments. Let's hit before, so the backslash key, and after. And I think we're looking good. What I would like to do now is start to think a little bit more along the lines of our local adjustments. So I'm going to come across here. I'm going to use our subject detection tool, and it's done a fantastic job. Let's maybe just add here using a brush. You see there's quite a hard line where the dust cloud has kind of told Lightroom that that's no longer a subject. So I'm going to come in here. I've adjusted the flow of my brush to 30 using my numerical keys, and I'm just going to make sure that this is not left as a hard edge. And in this particular area, all we were looking to do is just maybe lift some of the shadows just a touch, and at the same time add a little bit more of clarity to that frame. And you'll see our subject now pops just a little bit more before and after. You can see it just adds that little bit of extra detail, but without compromising our contrast. The other potentially distracting element here, and it's minor, but the whiter, kind of lighter parts of this water down in the foreground, I'm just going to open up my brush tool and come through here. I'm going to use the square brackets to enlarge the brush, and still using a flow of 30, keeping it nice and low here. I'm just going to hit O for overlay so that you can see where I'm brushing, and I'm just going to work these brighter parts. And essentially what I'm looking to do is I'm going to use an exposure adjustment. See how the large brush with a soft flow allows me to kind of work this area without leaving any hard edges. And all I'm going to do, the whole purpose here, remember when we spoke about eye mapping and how we can use certain tools to push or pull a viewer's eye. I want to push you away from the water and draw you nearer to the Wildebeest. So what I'm going to be doing here is just dropping the exposure slightly. Now if you could see somewhere around about there. Okay, so with my masks and adjustments, I'm going to switch them off and switch them back on. Before and after. Before and after. Looking at this, I can see we just maybe need to refine the brush a little bit, so I'm going to drop my flow to a value of 2 and just spill that out a little bit over there. And I'm also going to then expand the brush and bring that in just a little bit more underneath here. And you'll see, because I'm working with a very large brush and a large flow, I'm not too concerned about leaving hard edges and having to work really around the detail of our subjects. So just run that over there. So again, a before and after. Push and pull, and I think that's done a really good job of just anchoring the detail in that shot. Global before and after. I think quite a nice adjustment there. Right, you'll recall in the beginning I mentioned potentially looking at dropping the saturation. Now, typically people would kind of go for something like that, and this can very well work. It is a style. However, there is something a little bit more subtle and slightly different by just dropping the exposure, the saturation slider here. You'll see that there's still color in the frame. It's not a pure black and white, which, by the way, will also work quite well. But there is a little bit of color in there. And I just thought it would be a good opportunity to show you that, it's not always about increasing the saturation or potentially just going all the way to completely desaturated image. There is sometimes an option, and images do lend themselves to having some of the saturation pulled out of them while still remaining, leaving some of the color in the frame. On this image, I think we're maybe just going to drop the saturation just ever so slightly to have something like that. Looking at the shot, I think we have kind of gone through everything that we needed to. Perhaps this background here, I don't think we need to do too much about that. Right, let's have a look. Global before and after. I think I'm happy with that adjustment, and that is where we are going to leave it for today. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and that you found some new and exciting techniques here. And just, I think probably more than the techniques now, people are starting to enjoy the thought process behind editing an image. Why are we using a brush? Why are we looking to increase contrast? Why are we cropping in a little bit more? And I hope that some of those tips and tricks that I've used here today, that you will be finding those useful. Thank you again for watching, and please, if you have any comments or suggestions, please drop them into the comments section below this video. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.